Remember that AMD GPU, the 7900 GRE, that I said maybe could pose a serious threat to NVIDIA's 4070 Ti? Well, AMD has sort of said that the price for the US market is going to be $649. Now, I say sort of because I don't know if it's an official release yet. Some people thought that, okay, it's going to be just in China, but they have set US pricing, $649. And also, what's pretty interesting, it's not a 7800 XT, even though it kind of sounds like it should be. I mean, look at the 6800 XT. That GPU was $649, the exact same price. So it looks like AMD is playing that same game that NVIDIA has played. For example, when they tried to sell us a 4070 Ti as a 4080, even though that 4070 Ti should have probably been a 4070 or even less. So they can change the product stack much like NVIDIA. What's it going to take for gamers to really embrace the AMD side? And now let's hear a word from our sponsor, VIP-CDKdeals.com, a Windows 10 Pro CD key. Add to cart, you put in code CC20. This will also work on Windows 11. You want to go into your settings in Windows, change and adjust your CD key, click activate, and now let's go back to the video. Yes, the enthusiasts certainly have gone and bought 7900 XTX in some numbers, but if you look at like Steam surveys, the amount of AMD GPUs up in any of the top numbers is really small. In fact, most of the GPUs are going to be NVIDIA. They have a really big market share. The really high-end enthusiasts are going to want 4090s and maybe 4080s, and maybe going a little bit lower where you have more budget-oriented GPUs. Maybe AMD can sell some more there, but even there, the 3060 and even the 4060, even though it hasn't really sold well, is something that likely is going to sell better than a lot of AMD GPUs. Now, what's it going to take for AMD to take a bigger piece of that pie? I mean, Intel has been trying as well, but AMD has a much better foot in the door. I mean, they actually have some pretty respectable GPUs that can actually compete with NVIDIA on some terms. First, let me tell you why I think some people don't want to let go of NVIDIA, and they're all valid points. If you're like a content creator and not just a gamer, I mean, NVIDIA just has the better option. AMD support for a lot of different things that content creators do, just not going to be anywhere near what NVIDIA can give you. And then, of course, there are other things. If you're a gamer, something like DLSS 3 is not sort of a game-changing technology, if you will, in terms of GPUs right now. But in the future, it can definitely prove to be pretty worthwhile if the specs on the GPUs themselves aren't really keeping up with what we expect them to, and it's basically all the software magic on that side. At least on that side, NVIDIA certainly has a pretty big advantage. Like, if you throw a 4060 at a 1440p monitor, you're going to have trouble in many games keeping really nice high, frame rates unless it supports DLSS 3. And then while it doesn't make it perfect, it certainly makes it a more playable and a more smooth experience. So, gaming features, NVIDIA certainly still has an advantage over AMD. Drivers certainly have issues on both sides, but of course, NVIDIA generally has the better drivers, as people will have random issues with AMD probably a little bit more frequently, although it can really vary by driver. I mean, it's not just saying that like NVIDIA is going to be perfect and AMD is always going to have problems. It can certainly vary depending on the driver, the game that you're playing. So if you put some of those things aside, if you're a content creator, most likely you're just going to want NVIDIA. But let's say you're a gamer and perhaps ray tracing and DLSS 3 isn't going to be high on your list with the games that you play, then you're basically looking at the best rasterization performance compared to the price that you're going to pay for the GPU. Does AMD present a better bang for the buck? I mean, let's look at that 7900 for $649. If this gets like a mass release in the US, I mean, that's almost as cheap as the 4070. Not that the 4070 is cheap, but it's almost the same price, and you can bet that it's probably going to perform better than the 4070. 16 gigabytes of VRAM, that's already a big plus, and while it's a little bit of a stripped down 7900 XT, which a lot of people like better than the 4070 Ti even, with 20 gigabytes of VRAM, I think that it's close enough in price to the 4070 where it's going to give it a lot of trouble if it's a GPU that's going to be like a mass market GPU. The 4070 actually isn't a terrible GPU, 12 gigabytes of VRAM, even though the memory bus isn't really the best, it still manages pretty good 1440p performance. But if you have something a little bit better, like a 7900 with a better memory bus and 16 gigabytes of VRAM, I can see gamers looking at traditional rasterization certainly going for that 7900. And if AMD decides to release an eventual 7800, maybe that would come in at like, 579 or 549, maybe the price of the original 6800. That's going to be an interesting GPU because it's going to be cheaper than a 4070, and most likely it's going to have 16 gigabytes of VRAM if it's a 7800. So performance probably going to be still a little bit better than a 4070 and cheaper. That's when people are really going to have to look at the efficiency of these GPUs. They're going to have to look at their use case, like DLSS 3. If it's something that games they play don't use, like a lot of people tell me, then it might be a no-brainer to get the cheaper GPU. And of course, since we're not talking about any groundbreaking technology in these new AMD GPUs, you can look at like a 6950 XT from last generation. I mean, those have been selling for like literally $600, very close to the price of a 4070. And a 6950 XT, while it's not the most efficient GPU, certainly has a lot more VRAM than the 4070 and overall better performance. So as that one kind of creeps down under the price of the 4070 into the $500 something range, that's going to be an interesting comparison. If the 7900 is going to be fairly close in performance to the 6950, that's what maybe people are saying. There might not be a huge difference between them. What is a 7800 going to do? Even if it's a little bit less, but it comes out as a new GPU that's this generation and maybe like 550, 579 at most, that's certainly going to be an interesting option because let's face it, at that $500 mark, that's where a lot of people draw the line. So we're talking about GPUs people may not even want to buy anyway, but at $500, there's not much that you can buy. The 4070 jumped up to $599, and the 4060 Ti 16 gigabyte is fairly non-existent, and it's also a pretty terrible value at $499. You'd have to start stepping down below that price, so then start finding maybe last generation GPUs that make sense from both NVIDIA and AMD. So definitely a little bit weird of a GPU time frame here, and it seems like a lot of these GPUs are falling into that $500 to $800 range. A couple are more expensive, but that's going to be probably where a lot of people's budgets are going to fall. And obviously under $500 is probably the biggest market, like $200, $300. What used to be really good GPUs have been, slowly getting more expensive. So that's also a pretty big problem. But interesting to see AMD releasing more GPUs and how that affects the competition from NVIDIA, which as of now is still the dominant player in the market. Does it shift prices around or make people change their minds if they see better performance? Right now, it's still up for debate, but let's see what happens with these releases. AMD says there's stuff coming this quarter. All right, guys, remember to subscribe, smash that like button, and I'll see you guys on the next video.